At 62, Demi Moore remains one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood, fierce, luminous, and unforgettable. Her career has spanned decades. Her presence has redefined beauty, power, and resilience. From breaking box office records in Ghost, to standing shoulder to shoulder with male co-stars in G.I. Jane, she became an icon in an industry that rarely forgives women for aging, succeeding, or speaking aloud. But for all her boldness on screen, behind the camera lens, Demi Moore has fought a much quieter, more painful battle, one most never see and few truly understand. There's a reason fans are left speechless when they hear what Demi has survived. It's not just because of the tragedies she endured. It's how long she endured them while smiling, while performing, while pretending everything was okay behind the polished glass of fame. You see, Demi Moore didn't just rise to the top, she climbed, often alone, while carrying scars from a past that would have broken most people before their first audition. Her story doesn't begin with Hollywood. It begins in a different kind of darkness. Born on November 11, 1962, as Demetria Jean Gines, she spent her earliest years in a household not marked by safety, but by unpredictability. Her mother, Virginia, was only 19 when Demi was born, a girl still learning how to be a woman herself. Her biological father vanished before she ever met him. Then came a stepfather, Danny Gines, whose unstable job history dragged the family from motel to motel, 12 schools in 13 years. No roots, no lasting friendships, just movement and chaos. But the instability didn't stop at the front door. Fights between her parents were violent and frequent. Her mother struggled with substance abuse, police visits became routine, and through it all, young Demi became the quiet observer, the peacemaker, the protector, the little girl trying to hold up the roof while the walls cracked around her. She once recalled waking up to find her stepfather attempting suicide, just a teenager, and already she was negotiating with death to give her family more time. And still, she survived. Even as trauma began shaping her from the inside out, she discovered escape, not in drugs, not in alcohol, but in performance. Acting gave her a place to pour it all, the fear, the fury, the longing to be seen. At 16 she dropped out of high school and pursued modeling, later acting classes, not because she was confident, but because she had to try something that might lift her out of the wreckage. Then came the breakthrough, St. Elmo's Fire, About Last Night, and eventually, Ghost, the milestone role that would rocket her into global superstardom. For the first time, Demi Moore wasn't the girl with the broken past. She was the woman every producer wanted, the actress audiences adored, grieving, strong, vulnerable, and magnetic all at once. Ghost made over $500 million. But for Demi, the real miracle wasn't the fame. It was the fact that people finally saw her, except they only saw part of her. Because at the very same time, Demi was becoming Hollywood's leading lady, she was also a woman trying to bury the parts of her past that kept dragging themselves to the surface. Childhood trauma, sexual abuse, substance dependency, body image obsession. It was all still there, hiding beneath the red carpet smile, and the higher she reached, the louder those demons became. Her life was becoming a carefully curated photograph. Beautiful, iconic, inspiring, and completely silent about the truth behind her eyes. She became known for her physical transformation in G.I. Jane, shaving her head, training like a soldier, enduring real drills and punishment on screen. The performance was fierce, legendary, but beneath it was a woman still trying to punish her own body, still trying to prove she had control when everything else felt like chaos. And that's where the heartbreak deepens. Because Demi Moore didn't just survive trauma, she internalized it. She crafted an outer shell that could withstand anything. But inside, the cracks were growing, and fame, that addictive drug of validation and attention, became both blessing and poison. It gave her power, yes, but it also gave her more pressure than any person should carry, while still grieving the little girl inside them who never got to be a child. To the world, Demi Moore was unstoppable. But behind the scenes, she was breaking quietly, and this is only the beginning of that truth. By the early 1990s, Demi Moore wasn't just one of Hollywood's biggest stars. She was the star, bold, bankable, untouchable. She commanded roles that other actresses envied and paychecks the industry wasn't used to giving women. With films like Indecent Proposal, Disclosure, and A Few Good Men, Demi became both the fantasy and the force, balancing sensuality with strength, intelligence with intensity. She was no longer proving herself. She was shaping the way women were seen on screen. But there's a saying in Hollywood, they love you until they don't. And for women, especially women like Demi Moore, who dared to be powerful, ambitious, and unapologetic, that love is fleeting. She broke barriers when she secured a then unprecedented $12.5 million for striptease, becoming the highest-paid actress in Hollywood history at that time. But instead of being celebrated, she was suddenly vilified by the very machine that built her. The press circled like vultures, critics sharpened their claws, and headlines labeled her difficult, controlling past her prime. It was a fall orchestrated not because she failed, but because she succeeded too loudly, too confidently, in a system still designed to punish women for power. What the world didn't see, or refused to look at, was how deeply those attacks wounded her. For someone raised in instability, where love often felt conditional and safety was rare, public rejection wasn't just professional, it was personal. Demi had built a life around control, around showing only what was beautiful, capable, perfect. When that mask started to crack, she wasn't sure what or who would remain beneath it. At the same time, her personal life was becoming both her sanctuary and her storm. Her marriage to Bruce Willis had made them Hollywood royalty, red carpet royalty, tabloid favorites, the beautiful and beloved couple who seemed to defy the odds. Together they had 3 daughters, Rumor, Scout, and Tallulah, and for a while it looked like the whirlwind had settled. She spoke often of family being her grounding force, her chance to rewrite the chaos of her own upbringing. But love under pressure is fragile, and while Bruce and Demi tried to balance 2 massive careers, demanding schedules and the unrelenting spotlight, the cracks grew. By the late 90s, their marriage ended, not in scandal, not in rage, but in a soft, devastating unraveling. Demi described it as heartbreaking, like breaking a promise she never wanted to make. Bruce moved out, and though they would become friends again, the split left her reeling. The illusion of control was slipping away. Roles weren't coming like they used to. Scripts didn't automatically land on her desk. The industry, cruel as ever, labeled her washed up in her late 30s, a term never used for her male peers. And for Demi, who had given fame her whole self, the loss of relevance felt like losing an identity. And then, as if drawn by fate, a new chapter opened, one that would undo her, reshape her, and reveal how little of her pain had truly healed. In 2003, she met Ashton Kutcher. He was young, charming, full of light, a new generation's heartthrob. At 25, he was 15 years her junior, and their romance made headlines instantly. For some, it was shocking. For others, empowering. But for Demi, it was salvation. It was the first time, in a long time, she was seen again. Wanted, desired, centered, not as a mother, not as an icon, but as a woman. They married in 2005, and in public, they seemed inseparable. The age gap became a symbol of her refusal to play by society's rules. But behind those perfect photos, storm clouds were gathering. Demi was trying to be everything at once: the doting wife, the free spirit, the cool partner who wouldn't mind staying out late or partying a little too hard to keep up with a lifestyle that didn't belong to her anymore. But underneath, she was battling old demons of insecurity, rejection, and the desperate fear of being unlovable once more. She wanted another child, a fresh start, a way to create the family she never got to fully keep. And when the pregnancy ended in a devastating miscarriage 6 months in, something inside her collapsed. Still, she smiled publicly. Still, she posed beside Ashton, as if holding together something not unraveling with every breath. But she wasn't okay. And slowly, the world began to see the cracks not just in her marriage, but in her spirit. Where once she stood tall in bulletproof roles, Demi Moore was now becoming a woman bent under the weight of decades of unprocessed grief. The real tragedy: she still hadn't reached the darkest chapter of her story. Fame has a strange way of hiding a person's collapse in plain sight. You see them on carpets, in paparazzi shots, framed to perfection, and you think, they're fine. But Demi Moore was not fine. She was fading. Behind the facade of a superstar marriage, behind the Instagram posts with Ashton Kutcher and getaway vacations that screamed happiness, Demi's private life was unraveling, piece by silent piece. The miscarriage had left a wound that never truly closed. And though she attempted fertility treatments, tried to smile through the pain, the dream of having another child slipped further away. For someone who had grown up amidst addiction, chaos, and abandonment, motherhood wasn't just something she wanted. It was her redemption, her cleansing of the past. Losing that chance not only broke her heart, but reopened every old scar she'd buried beneath resilience and roles. And the cracks kept spreading. Her relationship with Ashton, once her anchor, began to falter. The age gap, once a statement of liberation, became a mirror of insecurity. Ashton was young, surrounded by youth and energy. Demi, doing everything to keep up, began starving herself emotionally and physically. She obsessed over her body, her age, her relevance, ideas that haunted her more violently now than ever before. Then came the rumors, his alleged infidelities, whispers of betrayal, photos, stories leaked. Suddenly, Demi wasn't just heartbroken in private, she was being publicly humiliated at a level not even Hollywood had prepared her for. The separation was confirmed in 2011, the divorce followed, and with it, any remaining structure in her life crumbled. Demi spiraled. She stopped eating. Her weight plummeted. Her energy disappeared. Once a symbol of strength, she became a tabloid headline. Demi's breakdown. Demi collapses at party. Demi's shocking weight loss. The vultures circled without mercy. In early 2012, she suffered a seizure after inhaling nitrous oxide at a party and was rushed to the hospital. The world gasped, but only because the mask had finally tragically shattered. The woman they thought could survive anything had just proved she wasn't invincible after all. She checked into rehab soon after. But here's the cruel irony. The world paid more attention to her fall than they ever did to her climb. That's the thing about women in Hollywood. When they're rising, they're admired. But when they're falling, they're devoured. Demi's daughters, Rumor, Scout, and Tallulah, distanced themselves during this time. Not because they didn't love her, but because watching your mother crumble under invisible weight is a burden no child should have to carry. For a while they stopped speaking to her, and that, she would later say, was the loneliest time of her life. Alone in rehab, reputation bruised, children distant, body fragile, and silence echoing louder than applause ever had. And yet, she didn't stay there. Somehow, even at her lowest, Demi Moore still had a flicker of fight left inside her. Not the fierce, fiery kind she brought to screen, but a quieter, slower kind. The kind that whispers instead of roars. Recovery wasn't linear. There were relapses, regrets. There were days she couldn't speak without crying. Nights she didn't sleep. Thoughts that haunted her from childhood to that very moment. You are unlovable. You're failing. You'll never be enough. But she kept showing up. Therapy became a lifeline. Journaling. Solitude. Simplicity. She began rebuilding not a career, but a self. One that wasn't built on beauty, or applause, or box office numbers. One that didn't need validation from lovers, casting agents, or strangers behind screens. Years passed. She repaired her relationships with her daughters. Slowly, tenderly. They forgave her. She forgave herself. They began showing up together again, not for cameras but for healing. She returned to film, here and there, not as the lead, not as Demi Moore, blockbuster star, but as an artist rediscovering what it meant to speak truth through story. Now not just performing pain but having lived it fully. Then came her memoir, Inside Out, in 2019. A raw, unfiltered look into the darkest corners of her past, her addiction, her body image struggles, her love and loss, and all the illusions she'd been forced to carry. And in doing so, she reclaimed her narrative. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She was offering truth. And for the first time in a long, long time, people listened, because when Demi Moore said, "I tried to hold everything together, until I couldn't," millions of women heard their own story echoing back to them. She was no longer the fantasy. She became flesh and bone, imperfect, powerful, and painfully real, and somehow, even more unforgettable because of it. After decades of chaos, loss, and expectations crushing her from every direction, Demi Moore finally began rewriting her story, not with blockbuster roles or billion-dollar paychecks, but with a new kind of currency: honesty. When she released her memoir Inside Out in 2019, no one expected her to be as vulnerable as she was. Yes, it was raw. Yes, it detailed the downfalls, the drug use, the eating disorders, the nights she couldn't remember. But what shocked people most wasn't just what Demi confessed, it was what she owned. There was no victimhood in her words, no blame, no dramatic flair, just truth. Stark, elegant, quiet truth, as if she'd finally walked into a room filled with mirrors and decided she was ready to see all of herself. And for once, so was the world. What many didn't realize until that book came out was that Demi had spent her entire life being shaped by what others needed her to be. When she was a child, it was the protector. As a teen, the adult. As a rising star, the beauty. As a leading actress, the bankable megastar. As a wife, the cool and collected force beside powerful men. And as a mother, the role model, even while she was wilting inside. But in her 60s, she stopped all of it. She traded performance for presence, fame for freedom, control for care. By now her relationship with her daughters had transformed. Rumor, Scout, and Tallulah didn't just forgive her, they started walking beside her. The family that once fractured now found new rhythms together. They appeared on red carpets not just in designer gowns, but holding hands, like survivors of a storm, who had stopped waiting for the sun, and instead became each other's light. And perhaps the most moving evidence of that healing came in 2020, when the pandemic locked down the world, and Demi chose to quarantine with Bruce Willis, her ex-husband, and their daughters. Photos went viral, them in matching pajamas, playing games, laughing, and it wasn't for show. For Demi, those months weren't just a reunion, they were redemption. She had once felt like a failure when her marriage ended, a broken homemaker who couldn't hold it all together for her kids. But now, in the quiet of isolation, there was a different version of family growing inside those walls. One not dictated by marriage licenses or romantic definitions, but by love that endured the fall and chose to rise again anyway. Bruce, who would later face his own heartbreaking health battle, became once again her friend, her co-parent, her ally. There are very few pictures more powerful than the one where Demi stands beside Bruce's wife, Emma Hemming, arms linked, smiling, not in rivalry, but in unity. Proof that growth is possible if ego is left behind. And while the headlines shifted to newer stars and louder scandals, Demi found comfort in the silence. She began doing work that mattered to her, not to the agents, not to the press, but to the girl who still lived inside her, the girl who never knew safety, and wanted, at last, to feel it. Philanthropy became part of her purpose, mental health advocacy, sobriety support, real conversations in real rooms with people who didn't see her as an untouchable Hollywood mystery, but as someone who knew pain intimately, and who refused to let it define her anymore. Her later roles, like in Brave New World or in independent art films, weren't about topping the charts anymore. They were about honest work that allowed her to exhale. She began taking fashion risks again too, appearing at couture shows in Paris, on the covers of major magazines, not as comeback choices but as declarations: I'm still here, I still get to enjoy this, I'm still me. But perhaps what left fans truly speechless was not the transformation of Demi's body, reputation or career, it was the transformation of her spirit. She no longer looked like someone holding her life together by sheer force. She carried herself like a woman who had finally put the broken pieces back exactly where she wanted them, cracks and all. Because that's the thing about people like Demi Moore, they don't just heal, they become guides, lanterns for others still lost in the dark. And somehow, through addiction, through heartbreak, through humiliation and collapse, Demi didn't just survive, she softened, she glowed, she forgave, not just others but herself. And in doing so, she rewrote what strength actually looks like. In every era of Hollywood there are stars who shine brightly for a moment, and then vanish like fog in the sun. And then there are those like Demi Moore. Not just visible, not just iconic, but unforgettable for how they survived. Her story was never just about fame. Not really. It was about fighting gravity. The kind that pulls a woman back into the past, back into shame, back into doubt. But Demi kept climbing. And when the climb gave way, when she fell, she didn't vanish. She learned how to fly in freefall. Perhaps that's why even now fans speak of her with such reverence, such awe, not because she was perfect, but because she was truthful. Her pain was never placed carefully behind publicity walls. It was poured out raw and human, in books, in interviews, in the silent moments where her face said what words could not, and what she gave back to the world, through her story, was permission. Permission to be flawed, to recover out loud, to lose things and people and still keep going. For women especially, Demi's story resonated like a heartbeat. She was one of the first actresses of her era to hold real power, to call the shots, to command millions, to choose roles that defied the male gaze and challenged norms. And yet she paid a price most men never pay for the same ambition. The media scrutinized her every pound, dissected every wrinkle, named her difficult, unruly, washed up, and unstable, simply because she refused to apologize for being everything the world says a woman is not supposed to be: outspoken, bold, sexy and serious, older and relevant. But in the years that followed her so-called downfall, a strange thing happened. Demi's voice only grew louder. More producers began listening to women, more actresses began refusing to shrink, and those old headlines about Demi, they didn't age as well as she did. She became the ghost of every truth the industry tried to bury, and her dignity became its own kind of revolution. So where does that leave her now, at 62, still radiant, still graceful, but no longer performing? She spends more time in nature than at industry events. She speaks to the press when she wants to, not because she needs the visibility. She writes, reads, parents, loves, and she remains surrounded by a tribe of women who protect her peace as fiercely as she once protected everyone else's perception of her. There's a photo taken years after her breakdown, of Demi sitting on her cabin porch, barefoot, sun on her neck, a cup of tea in hand. No makeup, no artifice, just Demi, at ease. That photo says more than any film ever could. It says, I survived myself, because that was always the real war. Not the media, not the marriages, not even the addiction. The real war was internal. A lifetime of voices in her head telling her she was never enough. And the greatest victory was in quieting them. And isn't that what a tragedy really is? Not a downfall, not a scandal, but the slow-burning ache of someone who has everything the world says you could want, and still feels empty inside. Demi Moore lived that ache, and then she lived past it. Now when you hear her name, you don't just think of the red dress in Indecent Proposal, or the drill scenes in G.I. Jane, or the pottery wheel in Ghost. You think of resilience. You think of reinvention. You think of a woman whose trauma did not make her bitter, only deeper, whose silence became wisdom, whose vulnerability became strength, whose failures became fuel. And somewhere out there on a ranch, or in a quiet room filled with sunlight, she is smiling, not to prove anything, not to hide anything, but because, against all odds, she made it through. And that might be her most remarkable role yet, a woman who finally played herself, and loved what she saw. There are stories that entertain, there are stories that inspire, and then there are stories like Demi Moore's, stories that stay with you, not because they're perfect, but because they're true. At 62, Demi isn't chasing relevance. She isn't looking for re-entry into the spotlight. The truth is, she never left it. She just stepped out from under it long enough to see who she really was without the glow. And what she found was peace. Peace isn't a mansion in the hills. It's not a trophy or a headline or a million likes. It's sitting still in your own body for the first time in years, and not needing to run away from it. It's waking up without the voice in your head whispering, "You're not enough." It's looking in the mirror and saying, "That's me, and that's okay." It wasn't easy to get there. Demi fought tooth and nail, through fame, through family betrayals, failed marriages, relapse and the world's unrelenting gaze, just to reach a life that so many take for granted, one of calm mornings, quiet evenings and unconditional love. Her story has become more than a Hollywood timeline. It's become a roadmap for people who've loved too hard and lost themselves in the process. For women told they're too old, too broken, too late. For daughters whose childhoods were robbed from them, and who still managed to become protective, nurturing mothers despite it all. Demi has proven that you can be deeply wounded and still deeply worthy, that healing doesn't mean going back to who you were. It means becoming someone you're proud of at last. And what makes her legacy so powerful isn't just what she did when the world applauded, it's what she did when no one was watching. She showed up at family therapy. She fixed her relationship with her daughters. She sat beside Bruce Willis when he needed her most. She spoke honestly about sexual assault, addiction, abortion, miscarriages, codependence, and the dark thoughts that used to live behind her eyes. She laid herself bare so that others could see themselves, and maybe stop feeling ashamed of their own scars, because if Demi Moore could be shattered and still shine, maybe we all could too. And now, as her daughters enter womanhood, as fans rediscover her films with deeper understanding, as new generations read Inside Out and see the human beneath the heroine, her story becomes less about the spotlight and more about survival, more about strength. The quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need awards to feel valuable, the kind that lives in moments like these, meditating on her porch with her dog at her feet, sending voice notes to her daughters after dreams she doesn't fully understand, reading a quote that makes her cry in the late afternoon light, lighting candles before bed, not out of ritual, but gratitude. There's nothing performative in her piece now. She doesn't need us to applaud it. But quietly, we do. Because we see it. We see the girl who grew up in motel rooms and unlocked hotel penthouses. The girl who watched her parents destroy each other and swore she'd one day build better. The woman who chased love like it was oxygen, and eventually had to learn to breathe on her own. The mother who lost years to addiction, and then won them back with accountability. The wife who failed. The ex who forgave. The icon who stepped away from it all, and in doing so became more influential than ever. That's the truth about Demi Moore's private pain. It didn't make her smaller. It made her honest. Not pretty, not perfect, just human. And maybe that's what we're drawn to. Not the stardom, not the glamour, but the vulnerability. The reminder that strength doesn't have to shout, that beauty doesn't fade, it transforms. So if there's one thing to carry from her story, it's this: whatever hurts you, whatever broke you, whatever loss or shame or darkness you've lived through, you can make it back to yourself. And like Demi, when you do, you'll discover that the most powerful comeback isn't at the box office, it's behind closed doors, where healing happens, where peace is earned, and where the girl who once survived quietly finally learns how to live out loud.